Maya Chen wiped grease from her prosthetic arm, a beautiful hybrid of Rigelian strength enhancers and Terran neural interfaces that she'd built herself after losing the original in a salvage accident 15 years ago. The cybernetics hummed with quiet efficiency as she surveyed the magnificent chaos of Scrap Heap Station. Floating in the Kepler belt between two dying stars, the massive orbital platform looked like what would happen if a junkyard collided with a space station, which, according to legend, was exactly how it began. The arm had been a revelation in adaptive engineering. While Rigelian prosthetics were flawless but inflexible, and Terran interfaces were intuitive but limited, Maya had discovered that combining their incompatible systems created something neither species could achieve alone. A limb that learned, adapted, and improved itself through use. The Rigelians had called it an abomination of engineering principles.
Maya called it Tuesday.
Oi, Maya. Another bloody Zephyrian cruiser just dropped off their irreparable quantum drive,
called out Zeke Okafor from across the hangar, his Nigerian accent thick with amused disdain. His toolkit was scattered around a sleek silver engine the size of a small house.
Says it's got a 0.003% efficiency drop from theoretical maximum. Practically scrapped to them, innit?
Maya grinned, remembering her daughter Elena back on Luna, who would graduate engineering school next month, assuming there was still a galaxy left for her to engineer in. Elena had inherited her mother's gift for seeing potential in the discarded, along with a stubborn streak that would make a Terran mule jealous. The thought made her stomach clench with both pride and terror. The Zephyrians were the worst, or best, depending on your perspective. Their pristine civilization discarded technology that still had decades of useful life, all because it didn't meet their impossible standards of perfection. Maya had once watched a Zephyrian engineer spend three standard hours calculating whether a power coupling with 99.7% efficiency was worth repairing, ultimately deciding that such gross imperfection was beyond redemption. She'd bought it for the price of scrap metal and powered half the station with it for 2 years.
Tag it for the Mercurian freight haulers, Maya shouted back. They'll love the upgrade.
She was about to dive back into her current project, a fascinating hybrid of Andromedal plasma conduits and Rigelian memory cores that absolutely should not work, but somehow did, when the station's emergency klaxons began wailing. The sound made everyone freeze. In 30 years of operation, Scrap Heap Station had never used its emergency system. Captain Rodriguez's
voice crackled through the comm system, unusually tense. All senior engineers to the command center, now.
Maya grabbed her toolkit and sprinted through the twisting corridors of the station, past workshops where human engineers were breathing new life into discarded alien tech. The corridors themselves were a testament to human adaptability. Sections of Zephyrian architecture flowed seamlessly into Rigelian military designs, connected by human-built transitions that somehow made the impossible combinations not just functional, but beautiful. She burst into the command center to find Rodriguez staring at a holographic display that made her blood run cold. The image showed a massive structure, geometric and angular, like a crystal cathedral designed by nightmares. It was easily the size of a small moon, and it was methodically destroying everything in its path with mathematical precision that would have impressed the Zephyrians if it weren't so horrifying.
Sto eto takoi, Captain?
Asked Dmitry Volkov, the station's materials specialist, unconsciously slipping into Russian, as he always did when stressed. His hands trembled as he studied the readings. Dmitry had survived the siege of New Moscow by building weapons from kitchen utensils and sheer bloody-minded determination, but this was beyond anything he'd ever faced.
The Hegemony Council sent this an hour ago.
Rodriguez replied, his weathered face grim. Maya noticed his hands trembling slightly, the same tremor he'd developed during the Centauri conflict, when his unit had held off 3 separatist divisions, using nothing but obsolete equipment and human stubbornness.
It appeared 3 days ago in the Vega system. Started with the outer planets, just unmade them. Converted their mass into exotic matter, their gravity wells into space-time distortions. The physics team thinks it's somehow inverting the strong nuclear force at a quantum level.
He pulled up another display showing the systematic destruction.
Yesterday it finished with Vega 4. Population 2 billion. Every evacuation ship, every defense platform, every theoretical physicist in the system, gone. Converted into part of itself.
The room fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems.
The Council's best scientists are stumped.
Rodriguez continued, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone delivering terminal diagnosis.
They threw everything at it. Zephyrian perfection weapons, Andromedal theoretical physics, Rigelian military might. The thing just absorbed every attack and used the energy to make itself stronger. They're calling it the Decimator.
He paused, swallowing hard.
According to their projections, it's heading for the core worlds. If it maintains current trajectory and speed, it'll reach Earth in 6 weeks.
Zeke whistled low, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grim calculation. And they're calling us why exactly? We're salvage engineers, not weapons designers.
Because, Rodriguez said, said, pulling up another display showing ship movements throughout the galaxy.
Every major civilization is evacuating. The Zephyrians analyzed the problem for exactly 47 minutes before declaring it unsolvable within acceptable parameters and fleeing to the Magellanic Clouds. The Andromedans spent 3 days running theoretical models, concluded the situation violated their understanding of physics, and shuttered their trade routes. Even the Rigelians, who've survived 3 galactic wars by never backing down from anything, are packing up their entire species.
Maya studied the images of the Decimator, her engineer's mind already working. Something about its mathematical precision reminded her of Zephyrian designs, but wrong somehow. Perfection turned malevolent.
But someone built this thing, which means someone had to understand how it works.
The Council's archaeologists think it's from the predecessors, Rodriguez said. The civilization that vanished 1 million years ago. The same ones who left all those ruins scattered across the galaxy. The ones everyone's been treating like museums instead of studying properly.
Because they're too dangerous to disturb, Dmitri said with obvious disdain. Meanwhile, we've been pulling predecessor tech out of those ruins for decades. Half our best innovations come from reverse engineering their discarded components.
His voice carried bitter irony. He'd lost his original research position at the Moscow Engineering Institute for suggesting that proper academic procedure was less important than understanding how things actually worked. Maya felt a familiar thrill, the same sensation she got when looking at a pile of seemingly incompatible alien technology and seeing the potential for something beautiful. But underneath was cold terror at the thought of Elena graduating into a galaxy where something like the Decimator could exist.
Cap, what if that's exactly why they called us? What if the solution to this thing is sitting in our scrapyards right now, and everyone else is too proud or too afraid to see it?
Rodriguez raised an eyebrow.
You think we can stop something that the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy can't even slow down?
I think, Maya said, grinning despite the circumstances, that we're about to find out what happens when you give the galaxy's best junkyard engineers the biggest challenge in history. Because while everyone else was running calculations on why it's impossible, we've been making impossible things work for 30 years.
Before diving into their own research, Maya insisted on studying exactly how the galaxy's superior civilizations had failed. The recordings made for sobering viewing. The Zephyrian attack had been mathematically perfect, a precisely calculated barrage of harmonically tuned energy weapons that should have disrupted any known technology. Their fleet had maintained flawless formation. Their targeting systems had achieved 100% accuracy. And their weapons had performed exactly as designed. The Decimator had absorbed every shot, analyzed the harmonic frequencies, and improved its defenses to exactly counter future attacks.
Look at this.
Lila Santos said, manipulating the holographic replay with disgusted fascination. The station's quantum physicist had learned 6 alien programming languages fluently, but right now, her expression suggested she was questioning everything she thought she knew about physics.
The Zephyrians recalibrated their weapons 17 times during the battle, achieving incrementally more perfect harmonics each time, and each time, the Decimator adapted faster than they could adjust.
They couldn't help themselves.
Maya observed, studying the tactical data.
Even facing extinction, they had to make it perfect. They couldn't just throw chaotic energy at it and see what happened.
The Andromedal attempt had been even more frustrating to watch. Their crystal ships had approached the Decimator with elegant theoretical models, attempting to counter its quantum rewriting with precisely calculated space-time manipulations. For 3 hours, their best theoretical physicists had broadcast increasingly complex mathematical proofs at the thing, trying to convince it that its existence violated fundamental constants.
They treated it like a logic puzzle,
Tommy Park said, shaking his head in disbelief. At 19, he already showed the kind of lateral thinking that made human engineers famous across the galaxy. But even his young mind reeled at such rigid thinking.
They actually tried to defeat it with math.
The Rigelian assault had been brutal and direct. Massive dreadnoughts unleashing enough firepower to crack moons. Their strategy was simple. Hit it with everything until it stopped moving. The Decimator had weathered the bombardment, absorbed the energy, and then replicated Rigelian weapons technology to destroy the fleet with their own tactics.
At least they tried brute force.
Dimitri muttered, studying the wreckage patterns.
But even their generals couldn't adapt when their first plan failed. Military doctrine demanded they continue the bombardment even as it obviously wasn't working.
Maya leaned back in her chair, pieces clicking into place.
They all failed the same way. They couldn't break their own patterns. The Zephyrians had to be perfect, the Andromedans had to be theoretical, the Rigelians had to be systematic. None of them could just improvise.
Which brings us to the archive.
Rodriguez said grimly.
Because if we're going to succeed where they failed, we need to understand what we're really dealing with.
The predecessor archive was Scrap Heap Station's most carefully guarded secret. 3 levels below the main workshops, behind blast doors that could withstand a direct hit from a Rigelian battlecruiser, lay humanity's collection of artifacts from the galaxy's most mysterious civilization. Unlike the sterile museum displays found on core worlds, this was a working laboratory. Predecessor technology in various states of disassembly filled workbenches and storage alcoves. Crystalline computing matrices sat next to twisted metal sculptures that might have been weapons or art, or both. The air hummed with barely contained energy from devices whose purposes remained tantalizingly unclear.
Okay, team.
Maya said as her core group of engineers gathered around a holographic projector showing the Decimator's schematics, what little they had.
We've got 6 weeks to solve a puzzle that stumped the people who built star-lifting engines.
The team consisted of her most trusted colleagues, Zeke, whose intuitive understanding of alien propulsion systems bordered on supernatural. Dimitri, who could make any material do things its creators never intended. Lila, their quantum physicist, who treated impossible problems like personal challenges. And Tommy, barely 19 but already showing the kind of lateral thinking that traditional education tried to discourage.
First things first.
Lila said, manipulating the hologram with practiced gestures.
This thing's energy signature is all wrong. Look at these readings from the vegan defense platforms before they were absorbed.
She highlighted a section of the data, her fingers dancing through holographic equations with the fluidity of someone who dreamed in quantum mathematics.
It's not just consuming matter and converting it to energy. It's doing something much more sophisticated, reading the quantum information of everything it touches and then recursively rewriting it into itself, like editing the source code of reality.
Rewriting it how?
Tommy asked, leaning forward with the intensity that made Maya believe he'd be running his own salvage operation within 5 years.
Into a pattern that serves its purpose,
Lila replied, pulling up a 3-dimensional model that made Maya's engineering mind real.
Every atom becomes part of its structure, but not through normal matter conversion. It's more like, imagine if you could edit the fundamental constants of physics themselves. That's what this thing does. It rewrites the rules of how matter behaves.
Dmitri cursed fluently in Russian, a string of profanity that roughly translated to questioning the Decimator's parentage and suggesting it perform anatomically impossible acts.
No wonder conventional weapons don't work. You can't damage something that treats your attacks like software patches.
Maya studied the energy patterns, her mind automatically cataloging similarities to their database of salvage technology. Something nagged at her, a familiar resonance frequency that reminded her of the tinnitus she'd developed from working around predecessor quantum cores. But this was different, desperate, somehow.
Zeke!
She said suddenly, her voice carrying the sharp edge it got when she was onto something big.
Remember that navigation array we pulled from the predecessor site on Kepler 442b? The crazy thing that kept trying to interface with our ship's computer?
Zeke's eyes lit up with the same fire that had gotten him kicked out of 3 different engineering schools for excessive experimentation.
Aye, the beautiful mad thing that maps quantum probability gradients instead of gravitational fields. We could never figure out what it was navigating toward. Kept pointing to empty space like it was looking for something that wasn't there.
What if it wasn't navigating toward something?
Maya said, pieces clicking into place like gears in a perfectly imperfect machine.
What if it was navigating away from something? What if the predecessors didn't vanish? What if they ran?
She pulled up the Decimator's trajectory data and overlaid it with their incomplete map of predecessor ruins. The correlation was impossible to ignore. Every major predecessor site positioned along optimal escape routes from the Decimator's point of origin.
Sweet Mary, Mother of God.
Whispered Rodriguez, unconsciously crossing himself.
They were refugees. Every ruin we've found. They're not monuments. They're refugee camps. You're saying they built this thing?
Tommy asked, his voice cracking.
No,
Lila said, understanding dawning.
they encountered it. Look at the dating, all the ruins from the same period about 1 million years ago. The predecessors were running from this thing and everything they built during their flight.
She paused, checking calculations.
Emergency bunkers, escape routes, and weapons research facilities.
Maya stood up abruptly, pacing as her mind raced.
Which means somewhere in all this junk we've collected is their solution. We just have to figure out how to put it together.
Assuming they found one.
Rodriguez said quietly.
They did.
Maya said with sudden certainty.
The navigation array. It wasn't looking for safe passage. It was looking for the Decimator. They built a tracking system because they found a way to fight it. They just...
She paused, staring at the scattered artifacts around them.
They just couldn't build it as one weapon.
Why not?
Tommy asked.
Because,
Dimitri said slowly, understanding spreading across his face.
anything unified enough to be a single weapon could be absorbed and turned against them. So they scattered the pieces across the galaxy, disguised as random artifacts.
Hidden in plain sight,
Maya whispered.
every civilization in the galaxy has been collecting the pieces for 1,000,000 years, treating them like curiosities. But we're the only ones crazy enough to actually use them.
For 3 weeks, the team worked around the clock, diving deeper into predecessor technology than anyone had ever dared. They discovered that what most civilizations had dismissed as random artifacts were actually components of an enormous, distributed defense system. The crystalline matrices weren't just computers. They were quantum modeling engines designed to predict and counter self-modifying threats. The twisted metal sculptures were resonance disruptors that could interfere with matter conversion processes at the subatomic level. Even the seemingly decorative wall panels from predecessor buildings turned out to be components of a massive early warning network.
The brilliant, terrified bastards.
Maya explained to Rodriguez during one of their daily briefings.
They never built it as a single weapon because they knew something like the Decimator would just absorb any conventional defense. They scattered the components across thousands of worlds, disguised as art and architecture. If something like the Decimator showed up, any civilization could theoretically assemble the pieces, if they were desperate enough and crazy enough to try.
You're talking about integrating systems from across the galaxy.
Rodriguez said skeptically.
Different power sources, incompatible quantum states, alien programming languages that make our computers crash just trying to parse them.
Which is exactly why we're the right people for this job.
Dimitri said proudly.
We've been making incompatible technologies work together for decades. Remember the Arcturian shield generator we powered with a Centauri fusion core and controlled with a vegan neural interface.
That violated the laws of thermodynamics.
Rodriguez muttered.
Exactly.
Dimitri laughed.
Laws are just suggestions when you're desperate enough.
But the real breakthrough came from failure. Or rather, from Tommy being too exhausted to follow proper safety protocols. After 72 hours of continuous work, running on synthetic caffeine and pure stubbornness, Tommy accidentally cross-connected a predecessor quantum resonator with a discarded Zephyrian harmony amplifier. The Zephyrians had thrown it away because it only achieved 99.7% efficiency, a failure so catastrophic in their culture that they'd actually paid humans to dispose of it properly. Instead of exploding, the hybrid device began generating something impossible, a field that made nearby matter temporarily immune to quantum rewriting.
Tommy, you beautiful, sleep-deprived genius.
Maya said, studying the readings while her heart hammered with excitement and terror.
Do you realize what you've done?
Violated about 12 safety protocols and probably committed several acts of physics that should be illegal.
Tommy replied sheepishly.
You've created the first working predecessor defense component in 1,000,000 years, and you did it with spare parts and the kind of happy accident that only happens when you're too tired to remember why things won't work.
The implications hit them all at once. The Zephyrians would never have tried this combination. The efficiency ratings were incompatible. The Andromedans would have spent years modeling the theoretical interactions. The Rigelians would have followed proper assembly procedures. Only humans would jury-rig alien technology while half asleep and accidentally save the galaxy.
But this is just one component.
Lila pointed out, studying the readings.
We need to scale this up by a factor of about 10 million and somehow coordinate it with the other systems.
No.
Maya said slowly, staring at the improvised device.
We don't scale it up. We scale us up. We make the entire station into one massive predecessor defense array.
The silence that followed was broken only by Tommy's nervous laughter.
That's completely insane.
Rodriguez said finally.
Yeah,
Maya grinned.
isn't it beautiful?
With less than 2 weeks until the Decimator reached the core worlds, Scrap Heap Station transformed into the most chaotic engineering facility in galactic history. Word had spread through the human diaspora, and volunteer engineers arrived daily from every corner of human space. The plan was ambitious to the point of lunacy. Convert the entire station into a massive predecessor defense array, using every piece of discarded alien technology they could acquire. The core worlds, desperate enough to try anything, began shipping their museum collections, priceless artifacts that had sat behind glass for centuries, were suddenly destined for Maya's workshop.
The Andromedans think we've lost our minds.
Rodriguez reported, as he watched Maya's team install a predecessor quantum core in what used to be the cafeteria.
They've calculated a 0.003% chance of success and filed a formal complaint about our reckless disregard for proper scientific methodology.
Good.
Maya replied, not looking up from her work.
If we were being reasonable, we'd already be running for the galactic rim like everyone else.
The integration challenges would have been impossible for any species that respected the boundaries between different technological paradigms. Predecessor technology operated on principles that conventional physics barely acknowledged. Zephyrian systems required perfect harmonic resonance. Rigelian tech was built for raw power and military durability.
The problem
Lila explained to a group of newly arrived engineers.
is that each species designed their technology around their psychology. Zephyrians can't build anything imperfect, so their systems fail catastrophically if they detect any deviation from ideal parameters. Andromedal tech requires theoretical understanding before it will function. Their computers literally won't work unless they believe the operator understands the physics involved. Rigelian systems have so many redundancies and safety protocols that they shut down if you try to use them in unintended ways.
She gestured at a workbench where a crystalline predecessor matrix was somehow communicating with a blocky Rigelian power core through a web of Zephyrian harmony circuits.
But humans? We've been jury-rigging solutions with duct tape and prayer for millennia. We're uniquely qualified to make this work, not because we're smarter, but because we're too stubborn to accept that it's impossible.
The breakthrough moment came when they successfully linked the station's main power grid to a predecessor quantum modeling engine. The power grid itself was a beautiful disaster. Fusion reactors, antimatter containment systems, solar collectors, and exotic matter generators that should have torn itself apart the first time someone flipped a switch. It worked because human engineers had spent decades finding creative ways to make incompatible systems play nice together. The moment the connections stabilized, Maya felt something shift in her bones. Reality itself became more stable around their position, less susceptible to external manipulation. Quantum uncertainty decreased. The laws of physics became more rigid and resistant to change.
We did it!
Dmitri whispered, staring at readouts that showed space-time itself becoming more solid around their position.
We actually did it!
But Maya could see the strain on their systems. The elegant predecessor components were overheating. The alien power sources were fluctuating wildly, and half their connections were held together with determination and creative profanity.
It won't hold,
She realized.
We can create the field, but maintaining it long enough to stop the Decimator.
She studied the power consumption readings and felt her heart sink.
We've got maybe an hour before the whole system burns out.
Then we don't defend for an hour.
Tommy said quietly, exhaustion and inspiration warring in his voice.
We attack for 1 minute, but we make it count.
Maya stared at the young engineer, seeing in him the same desperate creativity that had built Scrap Heap Station from literal garbage.
Go on.
The Decimator works by reading quantum information and rewriting it into organized patterns, right? So what if we don't give it organized patterns to read? What if we give it chaos?
Random chaos won't work.
Lila said immediately.
It would just filter out the noise.
Not random chaos.
Tommy said, his eyes lighting up with the kind of inspiration that usually preceded either breakthrough or explosion.
Human chaos. Organized, functional, beautiful chaos. The kind that comes from making impossible things work.
Maya felt the familiar electric thrill of a perfect solution.
We don't create a weapon. We create a virus. A chaos virus that spreads through its quantum rewriting system and teaches it why you should never pick a fight with the species that turned scavenging into an art form.
The Decimator arrived at the edge of the Sol system exactly when predicted. A writhing mass of converted matter that had grown to dwarf most moons. Every major news network in the galaxy was broadcasting as humanity's ramshackle space station positioned itself between the ancient weapon and Earth. Maya stood in the command center, watching the tactical display as the Decimator approached with mathematical precision. Her neural interface with the station's systems let her feel every improvised connection, every jury-rigged solution that held their defense together. It was like conducting an orchestra, where half the instruments were on fire, and the other half weren't supposed to exist.
Incoming transmission from the Zephyrian evacuation fleet,
Rodriguez reported. The holographic image of harmony of calculated precision materialized, their perfect features displaying the closest thing to panic their species could manage.
This is complete insanity. Your calculations show a 0.003% chance of success. A single improvised station cannot stop what destroyed entire civilizations.
Yeah, well,
Maya replied, her voice carrying the flat determination of someone who had run out of alternatives.
watch us try anyway. And for the record, your species threw away the components we're using to save your perfect asses.
The first contact came as a wave of conversion energy that should have turned Scrap Heap Station into part of the Decimator's mass. Instead, the energy struck their patchwork shields and simply stopped. The quantum rewriting field couldn't penetrate the stabilized reality bubble that their hybrid technology had created.
It's working!
Tommy shouted over the alarms as the station shuddered under assault. But Maya could see their systems failing in real time through her neural interface. The beautiful chaos of their construction was also its weakness. Every connection was unique, every solution improvised. And when components failed, they couldn't be easily replaced.
Zeke, I need power rerouted to Sector 7.
She called out.
Already on it,
Came the reply from the engine room.
but I'm running out of miracles down here.
That's when Maya realized the truth that would either save or doom them all. The predecessors hadn't failed to stop the Decimator. They'd succeeded. But their success had required them to sacrifice their own civilization to create a defense system that could only be used once.
We're not just building a weapon.
She announced to her team, her voice carrying across all comm channels.
We're building a legacy. The predecessors scattered the pieces across the galaxy because they knew someday someone would be desperate enough and crazy enough to put them back together. They just never imagined it would be us.
The resonance pulse that erupted from Scrap Heap Station was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It wasn't elegant or efficient. It was pure human engineering distilled into energy form. The sound of 10,000 different civilizations' discarded dreams, given voice through human ingenuity, empowered by the kind of desperation that came from having nothing left to lose. The quantum signature was impossibly complex, not random, but chaotic in the mathematical sense. Patterns within patterns that followed rules that existed only in the intersection between different species' understanding of reality. It was the technological equivalent of jazz music played by alien instruments that had never been designed to work together, but somehow did anyway. The effect on the Decimator was immediate and catastrophic. Its perfect quantum processes, designed to parse and rewrite any ordered information system, couldn't handle the sheer beautiful chaos of human engineering. Like a computer virus written in every programming language that had ever existed, the pulse introduced cascading errors into the ancient weapon's core logic. For the first time in its million-year existence, the Decimator stopped advancing and began to stutter. The battle lasted 17 hours and 43 minutes. Maya would remember the exact duration for the rest of her life. Not because the Decimator was particularly difficult to defeat once they'd figured out the trick, but because her team had to keep rebuilding their attack systems as components burned out from channeling forces that were never meant to coexist. It was engineering at its most frantic and creative. Solutions improvised in real time as the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. By the time the Decimator finally collapsed into quantum static, its rewriting protocols completely corrupted by their chaotic interference, every major system on Scrap Heap Station had been rebuilt at least twice.
Is it over?
Rodriguez asked quietly.
It's over.
Maya confirmed, watching the last traces of the ancient weapon dissolve into harmless radiation.
For now.
The reaction from the rest of the galaxy was swift and profound. Within days, ships began arriving from every corner of known space, not to evacuate, but to study what the humans had accomplished. The Zephyrians arrived first, their perfect chrome vessels looking absurdly pristine next to Scrap Heap Station's beautiful chaos. Harmony of calculated precision spent 3 days examining their hybrid systems before admitting in their musical language,
We do not understand how imperfection can exceed perfection. This challenges our fundamental understanding of engineering.
That's the point, mate.
Zeke replied cheerfully, showing them how he'd connected a Zephyrian drive core to a predecessor quantum matrix using copper wire and what he called aggressive optimism.
Sometimes the best solution is the one that shouldn't work, but does anyway.
The Zephyrian delegation was particularly fascinated by the concept of intentional inefficiency. Maya watched them struggle to understand how a system that was only 73% efficient could outperform their perfect designs.
Your harmony amplifier was 99.7% efficient,
She explained to them.
but our hybrid system, using your failed component, achieved something your perfect version never could: adaptability. Your perfect systems are fragile because they can't handle deviation. Our imperfect system was anti-fragile. It got stronger under stress.
The Andromedans arrived next, their crystalline ships humming with barely contained curiosity. They were fascinated and horrified by the concept of building things without fully understanding them first.
You assembled a quantum consciousness interface without completing the theoretical framework.
One of their philosophers asked in apparent distress.
How did you know it would work?
We didn't.
Lila replied cheerfully.
We just tried it and fixed the problems as they came up. Sometimes you have to build something to understand why it works.
The Andromedan delegation spent weeks trying to reverse engineer the theoretical basis for what humans had accomplished through pure experimentation. They never quite succeeded, which Maya found perfectly appropriate. Even the Rigelians sent delegations, massive, silent beings who communicated through electromagnetic pulses. Their idea of a complement was a frequency pattern that roughly translated to acceptable deviation from expected parameters. Maya found herself teaching impromptu classes to alien engineers who were beginning to understand that there was wisdom in seeing potential where others saw waste. The most popular course was Applied Impossibility advanced jury-rigging techniques.
The key
She would tell each new class.
is not to ask whether something should work. The key is to figure out how to make it work anyway, because somewhere in every pile of discarded dreams is the solution to a problem nobody knew how to solve.
6 months later, Elena graduated with highest honors and immediately signed up for transport to Scrap Heap Station. Her first project was collaborating with a young Zephyrian engineer who was learning to appreciate beautiful imperfection, building a scanning array that combined human intuition with Zephyrian precision. Maya watched her daughter work, seeing in her the same fierce joy that had driven her to see potential in every piece of discarded technology. The galaxy was changing, one jury-rigged miracle at a time, and the future belonged to those brave enough to make impossible things work. After all, someone had to keep turning the galaxy's junk into its salvation. It might as well be the species that had turned scavenging into an art form, chaos into a science, and impossible into just another word for hasn't been tried yet. In the distance, another ship approached. Another delegation wanting to learn the art of impossible engineering. Maya smiled, rolled up her sleeves, and got back to work. There was always another miracle waiting to be built from someone else's discarded hopes, and the universe was full of beautiful, impossible problems, just waiting for the right engineer to solve them. The stars were safe, the galaxy was learning, and somewhere in a pile of worthless alien technology was the solution to whatever impossible challenge they'd face next. Maya Chen and her team of cosmic junkyard engineers couldn't wait to find it.